Yeah, thanks so much. So we're going to return now to the extraordinary wrangle over control of Greenland. I'm delighted to be joined by the former head of MI6, the Secret Intelligence Service, Sir Alex Younger. Alex, lovely to see you. Unlike Donald Trump at Davos, will recognise that what I've got here is a map of Greenland. He called it Iceland. I don't know if you noticed that. I mean, it looks as though within minutes of saying he wasn't going to back down, he has now backed down and says there's a sort of joint NATO agreement for managing the security of Greenland. But I wanted to ask you, why is the sort of military presence in this part of the world so seemingly vital to America and indeed to NATO as a whole?
Well, that speech was pretty telling. There was a sentence in there which was, why would you defend something if you don't own it? Which utterly undermines the concept of an alliance, and I thought was really telling. Yeah. So there's a lot to worry about in what we heard. Yeah. But that is not to say that fundamentally there is, there is a strategic issue in the middle of all of this. And there are three factors which have elevated the strategic salience of Greenland. The first is that the ice is melting. And that it's now open to threat from new directions and needs to be defended. Second,
can I just ask you on that? I mean, we can see here quite how close Russia and America are. Yeah. But what has China been doing in this part of the world?
Well, so, I mean, the key issue is that ice has melted. Russia and China now have an alliance, so our two biggest security threats have come together. And we're in a heightened state of geopolitical tension. So there's a direct military task which has been neglected by Europe, which we need to address. But then it's also consonant with the wider feature of this competition, which is around rare earths and all of that. I'm more dismissive of that, really. I think Donald Trump's actual intent is a combination of the strategic issues I discussed, but more importantly, this idea that he has a zone of influence that he should control.
Now, we haven't got any detail on what this framework for a deal is. Do you have any confidence that we will get a deal that satisfies a man who literally minutes before said he needs title and ownership over Greenland?
It's hard because I don't think Europe can give that. No. I think that is a step too far. I'm a spy, not a diplomat. You know, I hope there's some clever diplomats on this. I would point to things like Northern Ireland. You know, there are creative diplomatic examples where you can have two versions existing at the same time. But no, I think Mark Rutte has done a skillful job in slowing this down. I don't know how he's done it, but boy, does this conversation need to be slowed down.
And how worried are you that ultimately there is no reversing this fracturing of NATO that we're seeing?
I think it's in play. I think what Rutte's done, as I understand it, let's look at the long term. The long term is that Europe needs to take more responsibility for its own defence. So I think we can expect a flex where Europe, which ends with European leadership of NATO and America providing the capabilities to underpin that. That's the ideal solution. I think that's doable. I think the idea is forming. But, you know, Europe actually has to bring stuff for the party in order to make that a reality.
Now, another leader who was there, Mark Carney, I thought gave a very impressive speech. And actually some of what he said rather echoed the point that you made a couple of weeks ago, which was this point that if you don't have a zone of influence yourself, you will be in somebody else's. He said, you know, broadly, if you're not at the table through your strength, you're somebody else's lunch, was the way he put it, as it were. What do we need to do? He says we're in this era where rules-based order is fading and it's not coming back. So what should, in a sense, middle-ranking countries like the UK and Canada do to make sure we do have a seat at the table?
Look, I thought it was great, and he talks, as I do, about the fact that this is a structural shift. The old days aren't coming back, and we need to organise to recognise that. There's something about a community of values that really matters that he was very eloquent about. But can I be super clear? At the end, this is about hard power. We can't have what we want.
And hard power means we have to have more military capability, to come back to what you were saying.
Technology, capability, alliances, all of these things we need to get serious about.
But, I mean, the thing that has been terrifying me, because, I mean, and Starmer's actually been talking about this really explicitly, is, you know, he has been saying our nuclear deterrent doesn't function without American cooperation. And you can't replace that anytime soon. So, you know, in the end, our ability to stand up to America is really limited.
Yeah, so let's get on with it. I mean, I think we should not hasten a disadvantageous outcome. We get a lot from our alliance with America. We should do everything we can to steward it. But we should recognise we're in a much more transactional world.
So has France handled this better because they're way less dependent on America than we are?
I think everybody... I mean, the Trump central point was America made the modern world and therefore we all owe America. It was a deeply transactional idea, which I reject because of the connectivity and reciprocity that exists. Yes, in 10 years' time, we should aspire to take Ukraine as an example, to have replaced the key enablers upon which we are dependent. Europe is a population of 500 million. It's asking a country of 300 million to defend itself against a country of 140 million. You know, we have got to stand up.
Totally right. So look, let's then get on to this whole issue of you're saying we're living in an era really where it's power that counts. Might is right, whether we like it or not.
Just to correct you, I think that's Donald Trump's view of the world. I don't agree. I think that the connectivity that exists in the world means that's an oversimplification. Right. And I think that's what Mark Carney was saying.
No, he was saying that, which is why I was sort of asking you about, you know, given that we are all connected, how we get leverage over somebody like Trump, or indeed China, or indeed Putin, the sort of blue strip there, where they just think it's all about might is right. How do we impose our more humane values on?
I don't have time to do the big vision thing. Can I tell you what I would like for Christmas?
Yep.
20 global-scale technology companies in Europe, including the UK. Totally.
We're not getting them by Christmas. I've got to tell you, we might get them in 5 years.
But where does America's edge come from? It comes from its innovation and its tech. So why can't we do that? We've got amazing...
Well, of course we've got to do that. We've got brilliant brains in this
Let's just get on with it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And just, I mean, because I thought I'd just sort of slightly sort of focus on this for a bit, right? Trump says under the Donroe Doctrine he can do whatever he likes in this sphere over here, right? China plainly thinks it can do pretty much what it likes over there. Russia, we know what it's up to. Is there any world in which Europe is a proper sphere of influence in that sense?
Well, you know, as Gary Kasparov said the other day, if you're not in a sphere of influence, if you don't have one, you're in one. And I think that the category problem for Europe is not to be in the Russian sphere of influence. And to achieve that, we need to ensure that Russia is seen to have failed in its adventure in Ukraine. If we do that, our confidence changes. I think we get a different sense of what we can do as a continent. I think all sorts of good stuff could flow from that.
And then we're running out of time, but we've got, as you probably know, the British Prime Minister going over to that red blob, going to Beijing, going to China next week. What should he be aiming to? I don't know whether he can get anything from President Xi, but what do you think the point should be of this visit?
I think when I dealt with the Chinese Communist Party, they were super good at doing different things at the same time. We used to be really good at that as well, and we've lost the skill. We should contest them when they really threaten our interests, as they did in the recent spy case. We should recognise that all trade and all economic competition is political for them and organised to effect. And then we should cooperate with them where necessary on things like climate change and what have you. They will find nothing odd about us taking a different approach, depending on those things, because that's what they do to us. No. So we just need to be super pragmatic. Yeah. If I have one criticism of Mark Carney's speech, is it seemed to lend some kind of moral equivalence, you know, to it between America and China. We are very angry with America at the moment, but I would not want to be ruled by the Chinese Communist Party. Yeah,
I think there are quite a lot of people watching who would sort of agree with you, Alex. Now, I want to go to the final graphic we've got here, which is all about military spending. One of the things I just want to ask you before we get on to what we spend, and I mean, it is, as a share of GDP, Russia obviously spends the most of the share of GDP, but it's also got an incredibly shrinking economy. So that share is more to do with, I think, the shrinking of its economy than the it is more than the absolute amount. The thing that slightly surprised me, but is China's spending as a share of its national income is relatively low. But I'm assuming that's misleading, given the enormous amount of military hardware we see it launching.
I mean, China's military modernisation should be taken seriously, particularly of its military its nuclear capability. This is real stuff. We don't have time for it now, though. China is more scared of its own people than it's scared of other people.
Yeah.
A lot of this is dedicated to internal security. But fundamentally, if that's what the data looks like, I would be careful in assuming.
No, that is what I'm.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, you can see that the UK and Germany well below Russia. Do you genuinely believe that we will get to the 5%, that the new NATO norm, 3.5% or 5%, depending on how you measure it, soon enough? Because at the moment, the rate of increase does not seem to be terribly rapid.
And it's very backloaded, and I really worry about that. And the Chief of the Defence Staff sort of said so. Yeah. We need to get serious. But the European NATO is 10 times richer than Russia. Russia is, and this is a terrible thing to say, it's actually losing more people from drones now than it is able to recruit. It is all to play for here. I think it is achievable. We just need to prevent Putin from being able to claim victory in Ukraine. That does require not only more money, but a sort of cultural change that we're all in this together.
And a resolve from Trump, surely.
Yes, there's this big issue about the point at which Europe can assume its responsibilities, accepting that America is much further away. Yeah. If America keeps on with the key enablers, intelligence, space, some other stuff, I think the point is coming where we can take that burden.
And just finally, is there any world in which a sensible British government could have blocked the new Chinese embassy?
There was a advisory put out by the Biden administration about the Salt Typhoon suite of cyber capabilities, which meant that China, for a time, could put malware into any telecom system in the world and get onto your phone and my phone. Yep. Yeah, I regret the sort of prestige win that we've conceded to China. I'm not sure we'll get much back in return. It's not a great deal.
But would you have advised the government to block it?
Well, so at the time, I thought the Golden Era was based on a...
Sorry?
I didn't share the premise upon which the Golden Era was based.
Sure.
Right? But they bought it.
Yeah.
The government were in a bind. Yeah. What I'm saying is that the security argument, I don't think, is the decisive issue here. If they want to get onto your phone, they can. Yep. That's a much bigger problem that we should be thinking about. OK,
that's very, very interesting. Great to see you as always, Alex. Now, I just want to ask you, so you've heard what Alex had to say, which is that, James, which is that broadly, the China threat is independent, as it were, of, what kind of embassy they have. So, I mean, genuinely, would a Conservative government have stopped this?
We did. I mean, I was the Foreign Secretary.
Delayed it, didn't stop
I was the Foreign Secretary at the time. Look,
well, you didn't stop it because it continued to rumble on. So,
so the point was, and I gave a whole speech on the UK relationship with China, and some of the bits, and we hadn't compared notes when I gave that speech. But one of the points I made is we have to understand where we need to cooperate, where we need to compete, and also where we need to protect ourselves, both sovereign protection and with allies, and running those parallel tracks was absolutely key. Alex is absolutely right. This is a massive PR win for the Chinese, and I am not yet seeing what we've got back, and that's just really bad diplomacy. And I put this on social media. Starmer has handed the Chinese a big PR win, and he's going to go to Beijing in the hope that in an act of gratitude, they'll give something back. That is not how it works. If you want to negotiate, you've got to negotiate from a position of strength. And Starmer's is handing over all these chips at the poker table in the hope that something positive will come back. And I think he's being played just as he was played on every negotiation he's entered into, including Chagos, including with the rail unions, including with the BMA, including with his own backbenchers. He gets played every single time.
Jeremy, do you fancy defending the Prime Minister?
No, not really. But what I would say is take something that Alex said earlier, which I thought was very interesting, that there's an interconnectivity in the world that is absolutely essential. Look at the supply of oil, look at the supply of raw materials, look at the supply of rare earths and everything else. Not one of the four big entities, USA, China, Russia, or the European Union, has any of these things in abundance. The USA possibly more than most. They actually rely very heavily on Africa and Latin America for those supplies. What we're looking at is almost 19th century imperial powers squabbling over bits and pieces from the rest of the world. Surely what we need is an era of cooperation to recognise the environmental and human problems and human inequalities that face this world. So shouldn't we stop looking at the thing from the point of view of potential war and start look at the thing from the potential of a more peaceful future? I'm terrified that none of the governments seem to be putting any effort into rebuilding the UN, any effort into funding the UN or funding overseas aid. They're all into weapons.
So, well, I mean, I'm not sure that is a completely fair account of where, Starmer, Macron, Carney would be. I think, again, in a world where you have an American president who has no respect for the UN, it seems to me, that they are doing, whether it's their best, they're doing something to try and preserve these institutions.
Well,
but you're right, they are massively under threat because of, Putin, Xi, and Trump.
We're seeing the end of international law. We're seeing the end of international order. And we're looking back again to a sort of 19th, early 20th century thing when there was basically a series of big power rivalries where they did deals with each other all the time.
And I suppose
in a sense, what Alex is pointing out is that those deals are what is on the table at the moment.
And finally, I guess, Alex, and I'm not asking you to press all of us, we've got to go to a break in a minute, but do you worry that we will not get back to, in a sense, globally accepted international norms until we've been through another, conceivably, Second World War style mega crisis?
I don't know if it has to go to that, but I think we were naive. I mean, I share all of Jeremy's regrets about the loss of this community of interest. But at the same time, we need to recognise that a lot of what we had was because America was the unipolar power and chose to police it and chose to create a zone. That was always going to go away.
And interestingly, Carney says that, I mean, Carney, one of the most interesting things which we might have debated another time is that, Carney claims that was always a con.
Yeah, basically. But the optimistic take here is that this is the moment where we grow up and recognise our responsibilities and use this interconnectivity that Jeremy describes to create something along those lines.
Well, that feels to me like a potentially positive moment at which to go to a quick break. Don't go away, because there's much more on this and our energy future with the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband. So don't go away.